What's up, good people? My name's AJ. You might know me as the world's coolest CFA charter holder, and today we're talking about a daily study routine when preparing for the CFA exams. So this is a question I've gotten a pretty good amount of times, and it's a good one. I think the way you manage your period of time, whether it's 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, that you are studying each day for the exams can make a big difference in terms of, eventually your final performance on those exams. But more immediately, the amount of information that you're able to pick up on and also retain that you can later use for recollection during your final review in the last 3 weeks or handful of weeks before the exam. So there are a lot of people who have talked about this on different online forums, and it's going to look a little bit different for everyone. I think I have a pretty good system, or had a pretty good system in place, so take this information and maybe adjust it a little bit to make it your own. But what I did for the exams eventually worked out for me in passing them, so I know that there's some merit to how I picked up the information when studying and later was able to reapply that information. You could use this as a guideline and then make it your own a little bit later on, depending on what you feel most comfortable with, but this is just what I did when studying each day for the CFA exams. So basically each day, each session would start off right where I left off with the last one, and that could be a little bit different depending on what I was studying most recently. But one way that might look would be at the beginning of a new LOS, or what the CFA Institute calls a learning outcome statement. And what I always did was started with the Wiley video lessons. So I had the Wiley Silver package, I believe, which includes their study notes and the video lessons. They almost work interchangeably. I kind of like the videos. I think I was a bit of a visual learner, so I use those more often than the study notes, but in other instances I use the study notes as well, like if I was traveling at my parents' or in-laws' house in the car or something like that. But at home, in most instances, I used the video lessons, and especially the sections taught by Peter Linto, because he's one of the highest regarded instructors throughout the CFA program. So I would go through the video lesson, and the general structure of those is introduce a topic and practice it. Introduce a topic, practice it, introduce a topic. And so I would take notes on about half of what I was seeing in the video lessons, or if I was reading that day through the study notes, I would take notes on about half of the information that was in the study notes, because they're already condensed. The study notes, whether you're using Kaplan or Wiley or whatever, are really highly condensed versions of the curriculum, the CFA Institute curriculum. So the point of using these study notes, rather than reading directly out of the books, is to save time and get to the most important information first. So I would then further consolidate that or condense that a little bit more in what I just mentioned, writing about half of what those study notes have down into my own notes. And if they ever practiced out any problems in those video lessons, I would of course practice those same problems, follow along, do the same math, and make sure I was coming to the same conclusions, kind of pausing along the way. So my sessions would start off going through those video lessons, learning a topic and practicing, learning a topic and practicing. At the end of each LOS, at least in Wiley's program, you would have a quiz, and it's usually about 10 questions over the prior, anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours of video that you just watched. So that would be kind of what I would consider step 2, which is take the Wiley quiz after finishing an LOS. And usually I'd be around 70% or something. There weren't a ton of questions. I think sometimes just 2 questions, and sometimes as many as 10 or 15. But it shows you what you got wrong. And if I got it wrong, I'd be like, well, why did I get that wrong? Look at the question that was wrong. It gives you a little explanation of that. If I didn't understand the explanation, go back to the Wiley study notes, find a similar example, and learn why I got that question wrong. So I would do this on a pretty frequent basis. After each, I guess I don't remember the terminology. I guess I'll call it a section. After each section, which could be a handful of LOSs, Wiley video lessons or Wiley study notes, I would then transition to the CFA text. Now, I'm not reading the CFA material. What I would do is all the blue box examples. So throughout the chapter in the CFA text, every page or whatever, there's a blue box example. And I think they're just called examples, but what they are literally printed in is a blue box. So blue box is the general term for those examples. They're practice problems. I would do all the blue boxes. And again, this is right after learning the material through the Wiley video lessons in most cases. So it might be like a week of Wiley video lessons. Then I would get done with a section and I would go to the CFA blue boxes. do all the blue boxes, get to the end of the chapter, do all the EOC questions out of the CFA text. EOC is end of chapter questions, and that they're at the bottom of every chapter throughout the CFA curriculum. And then what that accomplishes for you is number one, quantity of study questions, but also number two is different sources of them, because the short quiz questions at the end of the Wiley video lessons are of course written by Wiley instructors. And then it's very important in my opinion to do all the practice questions offered by the CFA program, most of which are blue boxes that I just mentioned, and EOC questions. So I guess that would take another week or so. So each section I probably spend 2 weeks on, and that's a generalization because different sections are longer than others, and again I don't remember the exact terminology that the Institute would use for those, but just to give all of you the framework, it's Wiley video notes, practice questions in those video lessons, Wiley Quiz, CFA blue boxes, CFA EOC questions. After all of that, and again that could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and I'm doing 3 hours a day, and again each day when I go back to sit down I would just pick up on right where I left off at, and I would just do 3-hour sessions was my schedule. Once I finished all those, then I would go to the CFA website and do the topic test. Now they're not called topic tests anymore, they were right when I started in 2016. I think they're just called online review maybe, but you have a set of practice questions on the CFA Institute website, and those are generally considered the hardest questions, maybe most comparable to the exam questions. I thought they were harder than the real exam questions, but what they do is show you the types of information that the CFA Institute is going to be asking about, if the blue boxes and EOCs hadn't already done that. And they just make sure that you're kind of doing a periodic review. Again, this might be once a month. When I would finish the entire book is when I would go back. I don't think I mentioned that. After doing these Wiley and then blue boxes, Wiley, blue boxes, when I finished an entire book, when I say book I mean the whole ethics book or the whole econ book or the whole stats, which is quantitative methods book, then I would go to the CFA website and do what used to be called topic tests, now I think are called online review. That process gives you like 3 different instances where you're practicing what you've learned at different intervals since you've learned it. And I think that's very helpful to later down the road when you're doing a review, coming back and practicing those questions again. So basically you had the practice at the end of the Wiley videos, then the practice with the blue boxes and EOCs, and then when you're done with the whole book, like the whole corporate finance book, then you go onto the website and now you're practicing questions again that you may have done 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago. So it's forcing your brain to recall information and remember what you learned, reapply it. Again, I think that helps later on when you once again have to start recalling all that information, but it might be 6 months later during a final review. You might notice that I did not mention anything about studying formulas, and that's on purpose. I did not study a single formula until the final week before the exam. I don't think that memorizing formulas is helpful at all throughout your review. When questions would come up that require a formula to answer, I would just look up the formula in the text and copy it down, and then apply the information from the question to that formula. I don't memorize the formulas beforehand. Some of them you practice so many questions enough that you will kind of just end up remembering, but I never did a formula memorization process throughout the months of studying. That was a final review activity for me, and I might make a final review or week before the exam video in the future, because that's a really important period of time to get right when you're studying. So don't study the formulas, in my opinion, until you're in a final review period, because you're just going to forget them. Some of the formulas are really long and obscure, and studying them 3 months before the exam, before you're actually going to apply them, doesn't seem all that helpful to me. If you follow this strategy that I used, by the time you get to the exam, you'll have done thousands and thousands of practice questions, all of the CFA provided questions, and all of the practice questions provided by your test prep provider if you're using one. And if you're not using one, you'll have just read through the text of the CFA program. So you're going to have a lot of reps in, which is good, and hopefully you'll have enough practice to have passed. So thanks for watching.